Good morning and welcome to the John DeVito Show. We're going to be doing a true crime show today, and this one is really a heartbreaking show on the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. For those of you that don't know the story, it happened, I think, roughly 25 years ago. She was 6 years old. She was a beautiful young girl who was a beauty queen. And for me, I kind of have a problem with that from the very get-go, where I don't like the sexualization of little girls. She was 6 years old. She was dressed up to be this gorgeous little doll, this little beauty queen. And unfortunately, on the night of Christmas, she was found dead in her home. So still to this day, she would have been 30 years old. Still to this day, no one has figured out who killed her, who took her life. And we're going to go into the JonBenet Ramsey case, talk about what happened, and go through some list of suspects to see if we can figure out maybe who might have been the person that ended the young life of JonBenet Ramsey. So welcome to the John DeVito Show. I hope everyone's having a good day. It is 8 o'clock in the morning, and, I've been doing some new true crime series, and, this one is one that really, broke my heart back in the day. I've done some others on young girls in Massachusetts, one being Molly Bish, another one being Holly Peranian, and then, of course, Vanessa Marcotte. And then through the month of October, I did a bunch of shows on the most infamous serial killers in the history of the country. So you can find any of those if you want on all the different platforms if you're into true crime. Now, for me, this case of JonBenet Ramsey, this was just a haunting case. And, I don't understand why parents feel the need to sexualize young girls. Not to say that, again, this was the little girl's fault, not to say this was the parents' fault. She was a beauty queen and she was gorgeous. She was a beautiful little thing, but they would dress her up to the hilt with the hair and the makeup and, different outfits and things like that. And you have to realize in this world, there are a lot of sick individuals. And, I don't get it. I mean, if you don't know who JonBenet Ramsey is, it's spelled Jon, a separate name, Benet, and then Ramsey is the last name. Google her, and you will see some of the pictures that are on the internet still to this day that show, how pretty she was. I mean, she was a gorgeous young girl, but she was a baby. She was 6 years old, and unfortunately, someone ended her life, which is just horrible. It's sad. It's terrible. And I don't know why parents feel the need to do these type of things and dress up their children in this manner. So anyway, with that being said, I mean, we're going to get into talking about her case a little bit. We're going to get into talking about maybe some of the suspects that might have been responsible, for her killing. And it's just sad to me. And it's amazing to me that after all this time that they still have not discovered, who the killer was. I mean, there were a lot of suspects. There were people that thought maybe it was her parents, and we'll get into all that in a second. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the girl JonBenet Ramsey. And I click on the article, and I see the picture of her. I mean, she was an absolute knockout. She was a beautiful young girl. Her name again, JonBenét Patricia Ramsey. She was born August 6th, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia. And she died, unfortunately. They discovered her on December 26th, 1996, at the age of 6 in Boulder, Colorado. She was asphyxiated by strangulation, and she had a trauma to the cranium as well. So her resting place is in Marietta, Georgia, and her parents are JonBenet Ramsey, the middle name being Bennett, but apparently that's where they got Benet from her name. And then the mother was Patsy Ramsey as well. So let's get into JonBenet Ramsey. We're going to talk a little bit about the case and see if we can figure out maybe, what happened and come up with our own guess as to maybe who's the person that entered the house. Now, for me, I have my own feelings on this. I believe that I have a pretty good idea as to who the person was, and we'll get into my theories in a little bit as well. But I'll give you all a chance to kind of think about, your feelings as well to decide maybe who you think might have been the person that ended her life. So JonBenet Ramsey was an American child beauty queen who was killed at the age of 6 in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. A long handwritten ransom note was found in the home. Her father, John, found the girl's body in the basement of their house about 7 hours after she had been reported missing. She had sustained a broken skull, from a blow to the head and had been strangled. A garrote was found tied around her neck. The autopsy report stated that JonBenet's official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with a trauma to the head. Her death was ruled a homicide. The case generated national public and media interest, in part because her mother, Patsy Ramsey, herself a former beauty queen, had entered JonBenet into a series of child beauty pageants. The crime is still unsolved and remains an open investigation with the Boulder Police Department. So one of the problems I have here, just starting off, is now I have a good size house. Their house was really big. They had a house of like 6,100 square feet. Okay. So all I know is if one of my children were missing, my house is half the size of their house. If one of my children were missing, I mean, you report your child missing, and then 7 hours later, you discover the body in the basement. 7 hours. I mean, if one of my children were missing and it had been 7 hours, I can guarantee you that I would have looked in every square inch of my home, including the basement, the attic, every closet, under the beds, everywhere possible, throughout the yard, in the shed behind my house, in the garage, in the cars. I would have looked everywhere. So for me, 7 hours had passed and they finally discover her in the basement. Now I get it. They had a 6,000 square foot house. But to me, you would think that every inch of that house would have been investigated within 7 hours. So to me, that doesn't make much sense. So anyway, just moving ahead. That's just my little observation there. The Boulder police initially suspected that the ransom note may have been written by Patsy, and the note and appearance of JonBenet's body had been staged by her parents in order to cover up the murder. In 1998, the police and district attorney both said that JonBenet's brother, Burke, who was 9 years old at the time of the death, was not a suspect. JonBenet's parents gave several televised interviews, but resisted police questioning except on their own terms. In October of 2013, unsealed court documents revealed that a 1999 grand jury had recommended filing charges against the Ramseys for permitting the child to be in a threatening situation. John and Patsy were also accused of hindering the prosecution of an unidentified person who had committed the crime of murder in the first degree and child abuse resulting in death. However, the DA determined that there was insufficient evidence to pursue a successful indictment. In 2002, the DA's successor took over the investigation of the case from the police and primarily pursued the theory that an intruder had committed the killing. In 2003, trace DNA that was taken from the victim's clothes was found to belong to an unknown male. Each of the family's DNA had been excluded from this match. The DA sent a letter of apology in 2008, declaring the family was completely cleared by the DNA results. Others, including former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner, disagreed with exonerating the Ramseys, characterizing the DNA as a small piece of evidence that was proven to have any connection in the case. It was not proven to have any connection in the case. In February 2009, the Boulder police took the case back from the DA and reopened the investigation. National and international media coverage of the case focused on JonBenet's brief beauty pageant career, as well as her parents' wealth and the unusual evidence found in the case. Media reports questioned how the police handled the investigation. Ramsey family members and their friends have filed defamation suits against several media organizations. So, again, looking at this case, I still can't get past the fact that 7 hours had passed and they hadn't looked in the basement of their house. I mean, literally for me, if an hour had passed and my child was missing, and especially when it was, middle of the night, first thing in the morning, it was the morning after Christmas and your child is missing, I would have turned over every possible stone. I would have called friends. I would have texted friends. I would have called the neighbors. I would have looked in every inch of my house. I would have driven around the neighborhood. I would have been looking everywhere for my missing child. And 7 hours went by, and these people did not look in the basement of their home. It doesn't make sense to me. Something there does not add up. And again, if you have someone, maybe if you're suspecting someone outside of the house, Okay, fine. But if there was someone that you suspected outside of the house and it truly was not the parents and it was truly not a family member that had done this, they would have looked everywhere unless they needed those 7 hours to stage a crime scene, in my opinion. So, one of the other things, I'm not sure if it'll be mentioned in this article, was when they had suspected that maybe an outside source had done this, there was no signs of forced entry into the house, and there were no footsteps in the snow outside of the house. Remember, this was in Colorado, and that's one thing you can always check in the snow is if there are footprints outside the house coming into the house, and there were none to be found. So I'm not sure how someone could have gotten in the house while erasing their footprints in the snow as well. So we'll go further into this. These are just my feelings. I'm interjecting here a little bit. I'm not meaning to influence you. I probably am a little bit, but this one really breaks my heart because this case, this case was as big as, Michael Jackson. This case was as big as O.J. Simpson. We've done shows on Pamela Smart, and this was as big as Pamela Smart. This was a huge news story back in the day, and it just still breaks my heart to think that this poor little girl they've never found the person that ended her life. So to me, it's heartbreaking. So anyway, JonBenet Ramsey, as we mentioned, was born on August 6th in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the younger of two children of Patricia and John Ramsey. She had an older brother named Burke, who was born in 1987. And I sometimes wonder about the brother Burke, and we'll get into that in a little bit also. JonBenet's first name combines her father's first and middle names and the mother's first name that she used as her middle name. She was enrolled in kindergarten at High Peaks Elementary School in Boulder, Colorado. JonBenet's body was found in the morning on December 26, 1996, in her family's Boulder residence. She was buried at St. James Episcopal Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia on December 31st. JonBenet was interred next to her half-sister Elizabeth Patch Ramsey, who had died in a car crash nearly 5 years earlier at the age of 22. So the Ramseys certainly had their share of tragedy in their family, which is a very sad thing. So John Ramsey was a businessman who was the president of Access Graphics, a computer software company that later became a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. So obviously they were a pretty wealthy family. His first marriage ended in divorce in 1978. John's two surviving adult children, a son and a daughter, lived elsewhere. In 1991, John had moved with his second wife and family to Boulder, where Access Graphics headquarters was located. Patsy Ramsey entered JonBenet in various child beauty pageants in Boulder, where she won the titles of America's Miss Royal, Little Miss Charlevoix, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All Kids, Cover Girl, and also National Tiny Miss Beauty Queen. JonBenet's active role in child beauty pageants and Patty's reported pageant mother behavior was reported by the media after the murder. In the summer of 1997, approximately 6 months after JonBenet's death, the Ramseys moved to a new home in Atlanta after a summer at their vacation retreat in Michigan. Patsy died of ovarian cancer at the age of 49 in 2006, and she was laid to rest next to her daughter. So let's get into talking about the ransom note. And there is actually a copy of the ransom note. I may try to read this. It's actually written on the actual paper, and it's very messy handwriting. So bear with me if I try to read this. It may be difficult for me to read, but I think I might be able to do it, maybe with the possibility of not being able to read some of the words. So according to statements that Patsy gave to authorities on December 26, 1996, she realized that her daughter was missing after she found a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note on the kitchen staircase at the Ramsey's family Boulder residence. The note demanded U.S. $118,000 in 2020. It's kind of an odd number. John pointed out to the police first on the murder scene that the amount was nearly identical to his Christmas bonus of the previous year. Not a bad bonus, which suggested that someone would have had access to that information, would have possibly been involved in the crime. Investigators looked at several theories behind the dollar amount demanded, considering employees at Access Graphic who may have known the amount of John's prior bonus. They also considered the possibility that the ransom demand was a reference to Psalm 118 and spoke to religious sources to determine possible relevance. The ransom note was unusually long. The Federal Bureau of Investigation told the police it was very unusual for such a note to be written at the crime scene. The police believed the note was staged because it did not have any fingerprints except for Patsy's and authorities who handled it. and because it included an unusual use of exclamation marks and initialisms. The note and a practice draft were written with a pen and notepad from the Ramseys' home. So, according to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation report, there are indications that the author of the ransom note is, in fact, Patsy Ramsey. However, the evidence fell short of a definitive conclusion. Michael Baden, a board-certified forensic pathologist who had consulted with both sides of the case, said he had never seen a note like this in his 60-year experience, and that he did not think it was written by an outside stranger. A federal court ruled it was highly unlikely that Patsy wrote the note, citing 6 certified handwriting experts. The court bemoaned the existence of self-proclaimed experts without credentials trying to wrangle their way into the case by accusing Patty without any scientific basis. Now, let me see if I can read this. This is going to be tough to read. Like I said, it's handwritten. It's very small, but I'm going to try my best. So here we go. Excuse me. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. Explanation point. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe, and I can't read the next word. And if you want to see her again, you must follow our instructions in this letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining will be in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank when you get home. You will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. to instruct you where to deliver the money. Excuse me. I will deliver the I deliver will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If you monitor us getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange another delivery of the money. Sorry, this is very bad writing and it's very hard to read. Pickup of your daughter instructions will be given and will result in immediate. If you do not pay the money, it will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be ordered to her remains for proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do particularly not like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. And let's see, I'm going to skip down a little bit further here. Follow our instructions, and you will stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Do not try to grow a brain, John. We are not the only one out there, so don't think that killing will be difficult for us. Do not underestimate us, John. Use the good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you, John. And it says Victory SBTC. So there you have it. There is a rough reading of the letter that was very difficult to read. So there was a 911 call, and then there was an initial search for the child. And this note makes no sense to me. The only people known to be in the house the night of JonBenet's death were her immediate family, Patsy and John Ramsey, and their son Burke. The ransom note contains specific instructions against contacting police and friends, but Patsy telephoned the police at 5:52 a.m. Mountain Time, and she also called families and friends, which I would have done as well. 2 police officers responded to the 911 call and arrived at the Ramseys' home within 3 minutes. They conducted a cursory search of the house, but did not find any signs of forced entry. Officer Rick French went to the basement and came to a door that was secured with a wooden latch. He paused for a moment in front of the door, but walked away without opening it. French later explained that he was looking for an exit route used for the kidnapper, which the closed inside peg ruled out. JonBenet's body was later found behind this particular door. With JonBenet still missing, John made arrangements to pay the ransom. A forensics team was dispatched to the house. The team initially believed that the child had been kidnapped, and JonBenet's bedroom was the only room in the house that was cordoned off to prevent contamination of evidence. No precautions were taken to prevent contamination of evidence in the rest of the home. Meanwhile, friends, victim advocates, and the Ramsey family's minister arrived at the home to show support. Visitors picked up and cleaned surfaces in the kitchen, possibly destroying evidence. I mean, why would they do that? Boulder's detective Linda Arndt arrived at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time in anticipation of receiving further instructions by the kidnappers, but there was never an attempt by anyone to claim money. So you've got this letter that was handwritten on Patsy's stationery. It demanded an exact amount that coordinated with John's bonus from the year before. They said that they would give explicit instructions as to how to deliver the money. There was never any attempt for anyone to call them to deliver the $118,000. So you get a note written on the family stationery. It was written in the house. It was written on Patsy's letterhead. It was the only fingerprints on it were Patsy's. And no one ever attempted to get the $118,000 that matched his Christmas bonus from the year before. Just seems like there's a lot of stuff going on here that don't make sense. So at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, Detective Arndt asked John Ramsey and Fleet White, a family friend, to search the house to see if anything seemed amiss. They started their search in the basement, which is interesting. John opened the latch door, which Officer French had overlooked, and found his daughter's body in one of the rooms. JonBenet's mouth was covered with duct tape. A nylon cord was found around her wrist and neck, and her torso was covered by a white blanket. John picked up the child's body and took it upstairs. When JonBenet was moved, the crime scene was further contaminated. The critical forensic evidence was disturbed for the returning forensics team. Each of the Ramseys provided handwriting, blood, and hair samples to the police. John and Patsy participated in a preliminary interview for more than 2 hours, and Burke was also interviewed within the first couple of weeks following JonBenet's death. So after the murder, they did have an autopsy, and the autopsy revealed that JonBenet had been killed by strangulation and a skull fracture. The official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with head trauma. There was no evidence of conventional rape, although sexual assault could not be ruled out. No semen was found. There was no evidence, and there had been a vaginal injury. At the time of autopsy, the pathologist recorded that it appeared her vagina area had been wiped off with a cloth. Her death was ruled a homicide. A garrote that was made from a length of nylon cord and a broken handle of a paintbrush were tied around JonBenet's neck and apparently had been used to strangle her. Part of the bristle end of the paintbrush was found in a tub containing Patsy's art supplies, but the bottom third of it was never found, despite extensively searching the house by the police in subsequent days. An autopsy revealed a vegetable or fruit material which may represent a pineapple, which JonBenet had eaten a few hours early before her death. Photographs of the home taken on the day when JonBenet's body was found show a bowl of pineapples on the kitchen table with a spoon in it. However, neither John nor Patsy say that they remembered putting the bowl on the table or feeding a pineapple to JonBenet. Police reported they found JonBenet's 9-year-old brother, Burke Ramsey's fingerprints on the bowl. The Ramseys have always said that Burke slept through the entire night until he was awakened several hours after the police arrived. In December of 2003, forensics investigators extracted enough material from a mixed blood sample found on JonBenet's underwear to establish a DNA profile. The DNA belonged to an unknown male person and excluded the DNA of each of the Ramseys. The DNA was submitted to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, a database containing more than 1.9 million DNA profiles, but the sample did not match any profiles in the database. On October 2016, a report said that the new forensic analysis was more sensitive techniques revealed that the original DNA contained genetic markers from 2 individuals other than JonBenet. James Kohler was the lead investigator for the DA's office, and he said that there were additional traces of male DNA found on the cord and paintbrush that Boulder District Attorney Mary Lucy did not mention, and that there were 6 separate DNA samples belonging to unknown individuals that were found by the test. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong believes that the DNA having showed up identically in several places on multiple surfaces, belongs to the killer. Former Adams County, Colorado District Attorney Bob Grant, who had assisted the Boulder DA's office on the case for many years, also believes that the DNA evidence is significant, saying that any resolution of the case would have to explain how the DNA showed up on several pieces of JonBenet's clothing. Forensic pathologist Michael Baden said trace amounts of DNA can get on places and clothing from all different non-suspicious means. There is no forensic evidence to show that this is a stranger murder. So, experts, media, commentators, and the Ramseys have identified potential suspects in this case. Boulder Police, and we're going to take a further dive into that in a little bit, but I'm going to go through this surface-wise first, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into the suspects at some point, okay? So Boulder Police initially almost exclusively focused on John and Patsy, but by October of 1997, had over 1,600 people in the index of persons of interest in this case. I mean, that's a huge number of people. Errors that were made in the initial investigation complicated the resolution of the investigation and applicable theory. These errors included loss and contamination of evidence, lack of experience and technical staff on the investigation, evidence shared with the Ramseys, and delayed informal interviews with the parents. Lou Smith was a detective who came out of retirement in early 1997 to assist the Boulder County District Attorney's Office with the case. In May 1998, he presented his findings to the Boulder Police with other staff members of the DA office, concluding that the evidence pointed away from the Ramseys. They were unable to successfully challenge the police department's belief that the Ramseys were guilty. The DA's office sought to take control of the investigation due to the animosity between the police and the DA's office and the pressure to obtain a conviction. Colorado Governor Roy Romer interceded and named Michael Cain as a special prosecutor to initiate a grand jury. Two of the lead investigators in this case had opposing views, but Lou Smith and Steve Thomas ultimately resigned. Smith became because he believed that the investigation had incompetently overlooked the intruder hypothesis, and Thomas because the DA had interfered with and failed to support the police investigation of the case. A grand jury was convened beginning September 15, 1998, to consider indicting the Ramseys for charges related to the case. In 1999, the grand jury returned a true bill charge that the Ramseys were placing the child at risk in a way that led to her death with the obstructing an investigation of the murder, based on the probable cause standard applied in such grand jury proceedings. But Boulder County District Attorney Alex Hunter did not prosecute them because he did not believe that he could meet the higher standards of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt that is required for a criminal conviction. Matt Lacey, the next Boulder County District Attorney, took over the investigation from the police on December 26, 2002. In April 2003, she agreed with a federal judge who sat on a 202 libel case that evidence in the suit is more consistent with the theory of an intruder murdered JonBenet than it was the theory of Mrs. Ramsey did. On July 9, 2008, the Boulder District Attorney Office announced that as a result of the newly developed DNA sampling and testing techniques, touch DNA analysis, that Ramsey family members were excluded as suspects in the case. Lacey publicly exonerated the Ramseys. So, I don't know if I agree with that or not, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but, that's what happened in the case. So on February 2nd, 2009, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner announced that Stan Garnett, the new Boulder County District Attorney, was turning the case over to his agency and that his team would be investigating it. Garnett found that the statute of limitations for the crimes identified in the 1999 grand jury bill had expired and did not pursue review of the case against the Ramseys. In October 2010, the Boulder Police reopened the cold case. New interviews were conducted following a fresh inquiry by a committee that includes state and federal investigators. Police were expected to use the latest DNA technology in their investigation. There was no new information gleaned from those interviews. It was reported in September of 2016, and the investigation into JonBenet's death continues to be an active homicide case per Boulder Police Chief Greg Testa. In 2015, Beckner agreed with exonerating the Ramseys, saying that exonerating anyone based on a small piece of evidence that has not yet been proven to even be connected to the crime is absurd. He also stated that the unknown DNA from JonBenet's clothing has got to be a focus of the investigation at this point in time, and that until someone can prove otherwise. The suspect is the donator of the unknown DNA. In 2016, Gordon Coombs, a former investigator for the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, also questioned total absolution of the Ramseys, stating, "We all shed DNA all the time with our skin cells. It can be deposited anywhere at any time for various reasons that are benign. To clear somebody just on the premise of touch DNA, especially when you have a situation where the crime scene wasn't secure at the beginning, really is a stretch." Stephen E. Pitt, a former psychiatrist hired by Boulder authorities, said Lacey's public exoneration of the Ramseys was a big slap in the face to Chief Beckner and the core group of detectives who have been working on this case for years. Now, we're going to get into here some of the theories, some of the suspects, some of the people that maybe were involved with the case. So let's read on, and then we're going to have a discussion at the end of this. Okay. There are two types of theories about the death of JonBenet, and I have my own theory. One of the members' theory is that Boulder police initially concentrated almost exclusively on the parents, John and Patsy Ramsey. According to Greg McCrae, a retired profiler with the FBI, statistically, it's a 12-to-1 probability that a family member or caregiver who was involved in the homicide of a child. The police saw no evidence of a forced entry, which is a problem, but they did see evidence of staging at the scene, such as the ransom note. They did not find the Ramseys cooperative in helping them solve the death of their daughter. The Ramseys said that they had reluctance was due to the fear that they would not be a full investigation for the intruders, and they would be hastily selected as the key suspects in the case, according to the Daily Camera. Now, for me, this is just my feeling. I'm a father of four. If one of my children was missing, like I said earlier, I would turn the house upside down, right? I would be looking every inch of that house. I would call everybody I know. I would sit down with the police and say, listen to me. I don't need a lawyer. I am an open book. I did not do this. My wife did not do this. My daughter is missing. I need you to find my daughter. Ask me what you need to ask me. I will tell you anything. I will give you any samples that you need. This is not me. We need to find my daughter. And then if the murderer of my daughter was never caught, I would spend every waking moment trying to uncover who that person was. I mean, did we see after the fact the Ramseys going out and trying to find the murderer of their daughter? I would never let that rest. I would be, posting posters. I would be searching. I would be offering, again, if you've got, all this money like they had, I'd offer $1 million reward to whoever comes with evidence to let me know who killed JonBenet Ramsey. I mean, again, I would use every resource I had to me to find out who ended my daughter's life, and they did not do that. So to me, it's just strange. So one theory that maybe what happened is that Patsy struck JonBenet in a fit of rage after a bedwetting episode and strangled her to cover up what had happened, after mistakenly thinking she was already dead. However, Patsy did not have a known history of uncontrolled anger. JonBenet's brother later said, "We didn't get spanked, nothing of the sort, nothing close, nothing near laying a finger on her, let alone killing your child." Theoretically, the strangulation could have been a red herring aspect to conceal other elements of the assault in the killing. Burke, who was 9 years old at the time of JonBenet's death, was interviewed by investigators at least 3 times. The first 2 interviews did not raise any concerns about him. A review by a child psychologist stated it appeared that the Ramseys had a healthy, caring family relationship. In 1998, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner said during an interview with a news reporter that Burke Ramsey was not involved in the killing of his sister. In May of 1999, the Boulder County District Attorney's Office reiterated that Burke Ramsey was not a suspect. The investigators had never considered him a suspect. The Ramseys did offer, so I guess I was wrong, but they did offer a $100,000 reward in a newspaper dated April 27th, 1997. 3 days later, more than 4 months after the body of the daughter was found, they submitted for the first time to separate formal interviews at Boulder County Justice Center. In 1999, Colorado Governor Bill Owens spoke out, telling the Ramseys couple to quit hiding behind their attorneys and quit hiding behind their PR firm. A Colorado grand jury voted in 1999 to indict the parents. An indictment cited 2 counts each of child abuse and said the parents did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation that posed a threat of injury to their child's life or health. Now, I don't know what that's about, but I'd like to know more about that. So, and this resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey, a child under the age of 16. Among the experts who testified in the case were DNA specialist Barry Scheck. You may know him from the O.J. Simpson case, forensic expert Henry Lee, who's also very well known. On October 13th, 1999, Alex Hunter, who was the district attorney at the time, refused to sign the indictment, saying that the evidence was insufficient for prosecution. The public thought that the grand jury investigation had been inconclusive. In 2002, the statute of limitations on the grand jury's charges expired, which I don't like at all. The grand jury's vote to indict was not revealed publicly until October 25th, 2013, when previously sealed court documents were released. The case of JonBenet Ramsey, a show broadcast on CBS on September 18th and 19th, 2016, used a group of experts to evaluate the evidence. The group theorized that Burke hit his sister in the head with a heavy object, possibly a flashlight, after she stole a piece of pineapple from his bowl, perhaps not intending to kill her. That suggested that the ransom letter was an attempt to cover up the circumstances of JonBenet's death. On behalf of Burke Ramsey, the council filed defamation lawsuits against CBS, the producers of the program, and several of its participants based on its claims. So that was one of my theories, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So there was an intruder theory. The second theory is the intruder theory. The police and the prosecution follow leads for intruders partly due to the unidentified boot mark left in the basement room where JonBenet's body was found. Early persons of interest included neighbor Bill Reynolds, who played Santa Claus, former family housekeeper Linda Hoffman Pugh, a man named Michael Helgroth, who died in an apparent suicide shortly after JonBenet's death. Hundreds of DNA tests were performed to find a match to the DNA recovered during her autopsy. Lou Smith, a detective in the case, assessed the evidence and concluded that an intruder had committed the crime. One night, on the night that JonBenet was killed, there had been 2 windows that were left slightly open to allow for electrical cords for the outside Christmas lights to pass through a broken basement window, and one was unlocked. And I actually do that in my house, so I could see that happening. Smith's theory was that someone entered the Ramseys' home through the broken basement window. They had been criticized because there was an intact cobweb in the basement window. The steel grate that covered the window also had some undisturbed cobwebs, and the foliage around the grate had been undisturbed. So that doesn't really add up, then, does it? There were also cobwebs in the tracks of various windows and some dust and debris on some of the sills. Smith believed that the intruder subdued JonBenet using a stun gun and then took her down to the basement. JonBenet was killed and a ransom note was left. Smith's theory was supported by FBI agent John E. Douglas, who had been hired by the Ramsey family. Well, of course, believing that the Ramseys were innocent. Smith resigned from the investigation on September 20th, 1998, 5 days after the grand jury was convened against the Ramseys. While no longer an official investigator in the case, Smith continued to work on it until his death in 2010. Now, again, one of the problems I have here is, if you came into the basement, there would not be intact cobwebs. There would be fingerprints and footprints in the dust around the windowsills. And again, they may have written this ransom note on a pad from for Patsy Ramsey, and it only had her fingerprints on it. And on top of that, no one ever called for the money. So to me, none of it makes sense. It's not adding up. Something doesn't add up. There were no footprints in the snow. There was no actual proof that anyone came in through those basement windows. The ransom note knew what John Ramsey's Christmas bonus was the year before, and no one ever called to collect that money. So a lot of stuff with that theory to me doesn't add up. And I don't, quite frankly, I don't buy it. So Stephen Singular, the author of Presumed Guilty, an investigation into JonBenet Ramsey's case in the media and culture of pornography, refers to consultations with cybercrime specialists who believe that JonBenet, due to her beauty pageant experience, could have attracted the attention of child pornographers and pedophiles, and that could be true. It was determined that there have been more than 100 burglaries in the Ramseys' neighborhood, that's crazy, in the months before JonBenet's murder. There were 38 registered sex offenders living within 2 miles of the Ramseys' home. That's insane. In 2001, former Boulder County prosecutor Trip DeMuth and Boulder County Sheriff's Detective Steve Ainsworth stated that there should be a more aggressive investigation of the intruder theory. One of the individuals who Smith identified as a suspect was Gary Howard Olivia, who was arrested for 2 counts of attempted sexual exploitation of a child and 1 count of sexual exploitation of a child charges in 2016, according to the Boulder's Daily Camera. Olivia, a registered sex offender, was publicly identified as a suspect in an October 2002 episode of 48 Hours Investigates. The killing of JonBenet, The Truth Uncovered, broadcasted by A&E on September 5th, 2016, concluded that an unidentified male was responsible for JonBenet's death based on the forensic DNA analysis of evidence. In the documentary, DNA and forensic scientist expert Lawrence Kabilinski stated that the unidentified male committed the crime. The district attorney's office investigating pedophiles indicated to former Denver prosecutor Craig Silverman that the district attorney's office followed the intruder theory. The Ramseys developed a relationship with the district attorney Mary Lacey in her office, which was criticized by authorities such as the city's mayor, Leslie Durgan. Silverman said, "Once you have conceded the possibility of an intruder, I don't see how the Ramseys could ever be successfully prosecuted." Gordon Combs joined the office as an investigator under Lacey when they were testing JonBenet's clothing for touch DNA. He also said that Lacey strongly supported the intruder theory and talked about it with his staff. Although he was not directly involved in the case, he was said to be told not to voice opposition to the theory because he might lose his job. It just seemed like weird that the whole premise of this attempt to influence the entire agency, he stated, which is very, very strange. So there was also a false confession. Alexis Reach, a 41-year-old elementary school teacher, was arrested in Bangkok, Thailand on October 5th, 2006, where she falsely confessed to murdering JonBenet. She had been previously known to John Mark Carr prior to coming out as a transgender woman. She claimed that she had drugged, sexually assaulted, and then accidentally killed her, according to CNN. Authorities also said they did not find any evidence linking Reich to the crime scene. In her confession, Reich had provided only basic facts that were publicly known and failed to provide any convincing details. Her claim that she had drugged JonBenet was doubted because of the autopsy indicated that no drugs were found in her body. DNA samples that were taken from Reich did not match DNA found on JonBenet's body. On October 26, 2006, Reich sent an email to Bill Hammonds of Bill's List seeking a literary agent to help publish a manuscript that some might find controversial. Reich later sent emails under numerous pen names, including Daxus the Conqueror, Dark Pink, and Alexis. Reich later changed her legal name to Alexis Valoran Reich, or Delia Alexis Reich, according to the Washington State driver's license, after coming out as a transgender woman. However, this was denied by Samantha Spiegel, who gained a restraining order from Reich, who alleged Reich only intended to undergo gender reassignment surgery to get closer to younger girls in a child sex cult called the Immaculates. Jesus, that's sick. I don't know, man. So there you have it. I mean, there's the case of JonBenet Ramsey. And for me, I think of a lot of different things. I look at a lot of the inconsistencies in the home invasion theory. Now, to me, if there had been a home invasion, there would have been evidence. I mean, there was literally no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of footprints in the snow. There was one footprint in the basement. There was the DNA evidence found in her underwear that was touch DNA. So we don't know where that came from. That could have been from anyone at any time. There was no semen on the scene. She was hit in the head and strangled. So to me, again, if you're going to strangle someone, why would you also hit them on the head? So to me, this does scream that maybe this was accidentally done. Maybe someone in a fit of anger hit her in the head. For me, the theory of it being the brother is something that holds water. I mean, it doesn't sound like he was really investigated too thoroughly. Again, he was only 9 years old at the time. Siblings do fight. Siblings do hit each other. And if he had hit her on the head with something like a flashlight and injured her or killed her accidentally, then could it have been the parents who brought her down to the basement and staged the scene and wrote the crime note to show that someone had broken into the house. I mean, there were a lot of inconsistencies in the story. I mean, number one, they had written the note on Patsy's letterhead. I mean, who goes into a house and finds the mother's letterhead and writes a 2.5-page note while they're in the house committing a crime? I mean, to me, that's insane that someone would spend that amount of time doing that. To me, it sounds like, again, who would have known about that secret room in the basement other than people that lived in the home? I mean, if you're breaking into this house and you've never been into this house, the last thing I'd be looking for is a secret room in the basement, unless I knew that room already existed. So to me, it either had to be someone who was in the family or someone that had been in the family's home many times. But again, like we said, they said that maybe they came in through a basement window that was left open due to Christmas lights. But if that was the case, the cobwebs weren't disturbed. There was no dust disturbed on the windowsills. There was no sign that actually anybody had come in that manner. There was no footsteps in the snow. There was no forced entry into the house. Here you have a family that went to bed on Christmas night and they woke up the next morning to a note that said that someone had taken their daughter, they wanted money, they wrote down the exact amount of his Christmas bonus from the year before, maybe trying to pin it on somebody he worked with. And then when the police finally arrived, no one ever called the house. There was explicit instructions that they would be calling to demand a drop-off location for the money. No one ever called, no one ever demanded the money, and no one ever requested that he deliver the money. And she was not alive. She was, in fact, dead in the house. So to me, the whole letter doesn't add up. To me, it seems like that was a staged letter. It seems like it was a staged crime scene. And to me, it would have either been the parents or the son. And the son, if he had hit his sister with something and injured her, maybe the parents panicked, maybe they set up a crime scene in the basement, they put something on her neck to look like she was strangled, and they set it up. And to me, that's what I believe. I believe it was probably the parents in the inner family that were involved in this case. I can't see how it could have been someone else. I really can't. It just doesn't add up. And again, I get it. The family had been through tragedy. Their other child had been killed in a car accident, and then you lose your daughter, JonBenet, and you've got the one son left. Do you want that son being thrown in prison as well? I mean, again, I'm sure they were distraught, and they did what they could to maybe hide the crime by staging it as a murder. Now, again, it did sound like they investigated the kid, though. They interviewed him 3 times. They said it was a loving family. There was no fighting. There was no strife in the family, supposedly. Of course, people can hide that. But it sounds like, he was interviewed and he was cleared. So you hate to pin it on a kid if it wasn't him. But for me, when I'm looking at all the other possibilities, to me, that seems like that may be the most likely scenario as to what happened. So I'm going to go into some of the suspects really quickly, and then we are going to wrap this up and maybe, just talk a little bit more about who it could have been. But those are my feelings. Maybe this will change my mind as I read this. But to me, my gut feeling is telling me it was someone inside the family that committed this murder. And unfortunately, this poor young woman was, never resolved. The murder was never resolved, and she's never been able to peacefully rest with the murderer of her case put behind bars. So I'm going to read this article. This was in Rolling Stone magazine, and this goes through some of the suspects. So the unsolved murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey never fails to spark a heated debate. Rife with conflicting theories, false confessions, and a growing inventory of evidence, the 20-year-old case of who killed the tiny blue-eyed pageant queen had become the white whale for armchair detectives and conspiracy theorists. While many adamantly believe JonBenet was accidentally killed by a member of her own family, and that's kind of what I believe, who then staged her death to look like a kidnapping, others convinced that an intruder broke into the Ramsey's house, and that could be a possibility, slaughtered JonBenet Ramsey and left her for the family to find. But again, I don't know why it took them 7 hours to find her in the basement. Again, if I have a basement, I'd be thinking she's a little girl. Maybe she's hiding in that room. I would have looked in that door. If I knew that secret room existed in my home, I would have been down there looking in that room, and it would not have taken me 7 hours to investigate the basement unless I knew that's where her body was. And I was waiting for the police to discover her body. So I'm sorry. That to me is a huge, huge inconsistency in the intruder theory. Over the years of relentless and sensational coverage that immortalized JonBenet Ramsey in tawdry pageant photos, and you got to Google those if you haven't seen them, they are troubling. The search to find her killer has turned into a massive game of media clue. Was it her mother in the basement with a paintbrush for a garrote? The emotionally disturbed older brother with a flashlight in the face. The family friend dressed as Santa who seemed a little too eager to visit his special friend at Christmas time. This fall, several television networks raced to reveal new information that had become the ultimate cold case. But aside from hype and bombast surrounding the 20-year anniversary, no one seemed to be able to offer much or any more theories. As it stands now, the list of people linked to JonBenet's murder is as winding as the spiral stairs that led to her corpse in the basement. Now we've supposedly been given all of the information we'll probably get. Here's a review of the alleged perps ranging from her own parents to a child pornographer on the lam in Thailand, who have come up in countless attempts to nail the killer behind one of America's longest and most baffling true crime whodunits. All right, so number one is the mother. JonBenet's mother, Patsy Ramsey, took whatever secrets of that morning she had with her to the grave when she passed away after a 13-year battle with ovarian cancer that eventually spread to her brain. Though both she and her husband, John, were formally exonerated in 2008, thanks to the development of DNA technology, many still suspect that the former Miss West Virginia accidentally murdered her 6-year-old in a fit of rage over a bedwetting incident that was covered up in post-haste. From the outside, Patsy was your pleasant and influential suburban mother of two, known for her beauty pageant winning daughter, JonBenet, and the lavish Christmas parties she threw every year. Still, several pieces of evidence suggest that she may have more to do with the crime than she let on. First, it had been speculated that while cleaning up yet another one of JonBenet's bedwetting accidents, which are said to have occurred with some frequency, Ramsey flipped a switch and slammed the little girl's head against the side of a hard, blunt surface like a bathtub. Second, JonBenet was found with a rope around her neck, tightened by a homemade garrote determined to have been fashioned out of an old paintbrush taken from Patsy's paint kit, then laid nearby. Third, the most bizarre ransom note in the history of ransom notes. Patsy said that she discovered 2.5-page ransom note on the rungs down the spiral staircase that led to the basement where JonBenet's body was found. Written in strange verbiage that seemed lifted from a classic film, the note demanded $118,000 to be given to the foreign faction by 10 a.m. the next day, which was later figured out to be the same amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from his company Access Graphics. Some sources, including Boulder PD's former co-lead investigator, Steve Thomas, have speculated that Patsy wrote the note herself in a moment of panic after realizing what she had done to JonBenet. But the handwriting analysis, though convincing, were eventually found to be inconclusive. That doesn't mean they weren't hers, but they were inconclusive. It was determined, however, that the note had been written on a piece of paper of Patsy's stationery from the inside home with her own pen. I mean, come on. In the years following the murder, Patsy's appearance appeared extremely defensive, once even hashing it out with a naysayer on Larry King Live. While family friends insisted that Patsy adored JonBenet and would have never put the little girl in harm's way, some onlookers came down hard, criticized Ramsey for sexualizing a vulnerable child through a string of beauty pageants. I agree completely on that. All right. So let's move on to the next suspect. All right, the father. So police arrived at the crime scene the morning after Christmas Day to find no footsteps in the snow or signs of a possible intruder. Linda Arndt, the first police officer to arrive at the scene that morning, looked around the house to no avail. Eventually, she sent John Ramsey and his neighbor, Fleet White, to search the house for unusual things. I mean, you would think that would have already been done. Ramsey made a beeline straight for the basement. Now, that's interesting. He made a beeline straight for the basement cellar, where he immediately found his deceased child. He had 7 hours to look for his child. 7 hours. And when he was finally told to search the house, he made a beeline for the exact room that she was in and found her immediately. Come on. There was no intruder. John and Patsy know what happened. Though he had been told to leave everything where he found it, he picked her up, of course, and carried the body upstairs, removing a piece of tape from the child's mouth and placing her down. He even covered her up with a throw blanket and further destroyed vital physical evidence. I mean, this was an educated guy. This was a smart guy. You can't tell me he didn't know what he was doing there. That's when Aunt started to feel that perhaps the Ramseys knew too much. Aunt had made no secret of her suspicions towards the family, while Ramsey's unseen discovery of the body was suggested to have been the fault of a botched police investigation. Some believe it's strange that intuition alone would lead a person to an admittedly unused part of the house. I agree completely. Aunt told ABC News in 1999 that she'd found other actions very suspicious too, like how John and Patsy let the 10 a.m. deadline in the $180,000 ransom note slip by without a word. Aunt described kneeling beside JonBenet's body inches away from John Ramsey, so convinced the murderer was in the house with her that she claimed to have quietly counted the bullets in her holster just in case she had to use one. Aunt wasn't the only one who found Ramsey's behavior in the morning strangely suspect. A detective on the scene claimed to have overheard John Ramsey making arrangements to fly family to Atlanta just hours after the murder. John later admitted to this, saying that he'd been asked to leave the house and just wanted to go home to Atlanta, where they had lived for over 25 years. Innuendo of sexual abuse began to circulate, though no evidence was ever found to prove the allegations. There was no history, Ramsey said in a statement. A person doesn't go through their lives as a normal human being, one night turn into a monster, slaughter their daughter, go to bed and get up and act like everything's normal from there on. That doesn't happen. He too was exonerated with his late wife Patsy in 2008. One-touch DNA testing cleared all three members of the immediate Ramsey home, which I don't agree with. So I don't know. There were other people, and I don't know if I'm going to read through all of these. I might, but there was also a town drifter, and they have a picture of him, pretty creepy looking guy. Gary Oliver was a 32-year-old known sex offender in Boulder, Colorado. When JonBenet was strangled to death in what looked like a potential sexual assault, given that there was a droplet of blood on her underwear, the convicted pedophile had been living in the area on and off when police allegedly found a magazine cutout of JonBenet Ramsey in his backpack after he was apprehended on drug charges in 2000. He was soon released, but suspicions remained. The Ramsey family's longtime private investigator, Ollie Gray, once reserved to Oliva's ties to JonBenet as a bombshell arrest in the case and lambasted the Boulder police for failing to consider him as a more credible suspect. Soon after, Olivia's high school friend Michael Vale stepped forward with an allegation supporting Gray's suspicion. Vale claimed that not long after the murder, a distraught Oliva had called him on the phone and confessed to his longtime pal that I have to hurt a little girl. I hurt a little girl. Vale revealed to In Touch magazine earlier that year that he was particularly unsettled by how the knots used to fashion the garrote that strangled JonBenet was similar to the ones used in the incident where Olivia attempted to choke his mother with a telephone cord. My blood ran cold when I read that, recalled Vale of his troubled childhood friend. Olivia, who was rumored to have possible connections to a theory that links the marks found on JonBenet's body to an encounter with a stun gun, Olivia had one on him at the time of the initial arrest. While he, too, was cleared by DNA testing for JonBenet's murder, he was recently charged with 2 counts of sexual exploitation of a child for possessing child pornography. He was last reported by the Denver Post to have been arrested in June and held on $100,000 bail and is scheduled to appear in court later this fall. All right, there was also an electrician. Another possible suspect, according to Ollie Gray, was an electrician named Michael Helgoth who worked in a nearby auto salvage yard. Gray referred to Helgoth as a hellraiser tied to an alleged property dispute involving the Ramseys. Could that have served as a possible motivation to seek revenge on the family and kidnap JonBenet? But again, she wasn't kidnapped. She was murdered. It had been speculated that once the 26-year-old Helgoth caught wind that he could be a suspect in the case, officials found a boot print similar to his in the nearby to the Ramseys' home. He committed suicide before anyone could get to him. His death occurred 2 days after a 1997 press conference announcing that the Boulder DA was zeroing in on a new suspect. However, Helgoth remains cleared by both DNA and, of course, his death. Then there was a school teacher. In 2006, former school teacher John Mark Carr confessed out of the blue to the 1996 strangulation of JonBenet in a graphic sexual detail. Carr was arrested in Thailand, where he had been living on the lam. We talked about this earlier. After facing child pornography charges in the U.S., the now 51 initially brought himself into the mess by reaching out to a University of Colorado Boulder professor named Michael Tracy over email in regarding to a documentary Tracy was making about the case. Once those emails took a disturbing turn, revealing the grown man's sexual fascination with JonBenet, Tracy reported Carr to the police, who arrested him in Bangkok as a possible suspect. He was immediately flown to Boulder for questioning, but was ultimately cleared after his DNA failed to match the profile of an unknown male found on the waistband of JonBenet's long john underwear. Carrie's demented confession involved a series of diary entries allegedly written from the crime of the scene. In one dramatic account, Carr recalls strangling JonBenet in a love game gone wrong. "Close your pretty eyes, sweetheart," read the excerpts, in which Carr repeatedly refers to himself as Daxus. "Daxus loves you so much. Oh God, I love you, JonBenet, and my lover's eyes are slowly closing." What a sick person he is. Unbelievable. There's so many sick people in this world. So Carr's alleged involvement broke international headlines, and his earnest insistence on having killed her was enough to set off a media fiasco. However, he was ultimately dismissed as a suspect altogether and written off as a pedophile who was after notoriety and fame. Officials who failed to verify that he was even in Boulder. According to a 2010 report by the Daily Beast, the one-time suspect is now living a new identity and a new gender and still living in the Pacific Northwest. Let's go into the housekeeper. Linda Hoffman Pugh had worked for the family as their housekeeper, and her husband Mervyn was the handyman. So it wasn't surprising that she was known to carry a key to the home. And during an investigation of JonBenet's murder, Hoffman Pugh didn't even begin to fit the pedophile or the profile the police were after. White male, former convict, 25 to 30 years old. But she didn't hold back on voicing her suspicions that Patsy Ramsey had accidentally killed JonBenet. That said, Patsy claimed to investigators that Hoffman Pugh was struggling for money and asked for a loan for several $1,000s, which Ramsey had declined. Police showed up at the Pugh's home that night after murder and asked the 57-year-old housekeeper to write the number $180,000 on a piece of paper, and reportedly took her fingerprints and several strands of her hair. She then testified in front of a grand jury for a total of 8 hours, including a statement against Patsy that read, "I think that she had multiple personalities. She'd be in a good mood, and then she'd be cranky. She'd get into arguments with JonBenet about wearing a dress or about a friend coming over. I've never seen Patsy so upset." The Hoffman Pugh theory asserted that the housekeeper let a trusting JonBenet down to the basement that night in an attempt to trick her employers into leaving money for the ransom. It's possible that she could have seen John Ramsey's pay stub for $180,000 as a holiday bonus and chose that as a demand. Familiar with both the home and the family schedule, Hoffman Pugh made a convenient suspect, all without an alibi. She was asleep in bed with her husband while her husband allegedly slept on the couch. There was no room to speculate that she could have been involved. So far, all evidence implicating her in the case is circumstantial at best, and she has never been formally accused of the crime. Now, there was also, there are so many different suspects. I'm going to probably wrap it with this one. There was a town Santa. So Bill McReynolds, now deceased, was a friend of the Ramseys who had dressed up as Santa Claus the week before JonBenet's murder to entertain the neighborhood children at one of Patsy's famous Christmas gatherings. While an older man dressed as Santa makes a pretty good perp in a sexualized child murder, the possibility that the now deceased McReynolds had anything to do with JonBenet's death is extremely unlikely. McReynolds was rumored to have paid little too much attention to JonBenet. So he paid too much attention to JonBenet, going so far as to arrange a secret visit from Santa on Christmas. You know what, though? If he was a good guy, he wanted to, make Christmas special for the little girl. I can understand that. Supposedly, he had chosen JonBenet to be his special friend, going so far as to bring a vial of glitter gifted to him by the 6-year-old with him into heart surgery. All right, that's kind of strange. Even stranger, he asked his wife to mix the gold glitter in with his ashes if he were to die. All right, that's a little odd. The particular story generated buzz by the Denver Post, but failed to amount to anything more than sensationalized character assassination of a family friend and old man. So there you have it, everybody. There is everything to do with the JonBenet Ramsey case. Again, JonBenet Ramsey was a beautiful young girl. She was 6 years old. Her mother had her in pageants and, in my opinion, was overly sexualizing her as a young girl. Look at the pictures, everybody. Google JonBenet Ramsey and look at the pictures of that little girl. She was beautiful. She was gorgeous, but they had her wearing inappropriate costumes. I don't understand why parents do this. And to me, it's all the evidence I see. and again, I'm not an expert, but the evidence I see points to the family. There were no footprints in the snow. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no proof that anyone came through the open basement windows. It took the parents 7 hours to search their basement looking for their missing daughter. And when the police told them to search the house again, the father went directly to the secret room in the basement and found her body, then contaminated the crime scene. To me, this seems like it was either the mother or the son. One of them killed her either on purpose or accidentally. They tried to cover up the murder. And to me, when you look at the 2.5-page ransom note where they demanded money, but no one ever called to collect the money, it was written on a pad of paper owned by the mother using the mother's pen. And, it was a very strange letter that knew the exact number of John Ramsey's bonus. One of the items used to create the garrote that strangled JonBenet Ramsey was an old paintbrush found close to the scene that was one of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrushes. To me, it's just a shame. This young, beautiful girl was made to look like a woman, way too young. And unfortunately, it looks like she may have had a very secretly, in my opinion, abusive family. And if I had to put my money on it, I would say it was the parents were behind the cover up, and it may have been either the mother or the son that committed the crime. I mean, the theories of people coming into the house did make sense because there was no evidence to show that. You did have the touch DNA and the blood on her underwear that, again, supposedly cleared the parents, but who really knows? I mean, who really knows what happened? I just hope and I pray that at some point they find the person that killed this poor young girl, because it's heartbreaking, it's horrible, and in this society, we need to do something to better protect the children and better protect the vulnerable in our society. And right here was obviously just a massive failure. So my prayers go out to JonBenet Ramsey. My prayers even do go out to her family. I don't know what happened. My prayers go out to everybody involved in this case. And I hope at some point, with advancing technology that we have in this country, we can finally discover who in fact killed JonBenet Ramsey. So for John DeVito, this is the John DeVito Show. This is another true crime episode. I hope you enjoyed this, and look for more of these as I continue to record private podcasts of varying degree. But this was one that's really been bothering me for quite some time, and I had to do a show on it. So take care. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be safe out there. All right. Take care. Love you all, and have a great day.